The alien cubs cried all night, until the human janitor rocked them to sleep. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The mournful wailing echoed through the sterile corridors of Galactic Diplomatic Station 47, a sound so piercing it seemed to penetrate the very walls. In the nursery section, 6 Mantodine hatchlings lay in their specialized incubation chambers, their translucent exoskeletons trembling as they emitted the high-pitched keening that had driven the station's crew to the brink of madness for 3 consecutive nights. Marcus Dean, the station's night shift janitor, pushed his cleaning cart past the nursery for the 4th time that night, wincing as the cries intensified. The station's artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night cycle, but there would be no rest for anyone with that sound permeating every corner of the facility. Another sleepless night, grumbled Commander Phillips, the station's 3rd in command, as she passed Marcus in the corridor. Her normally pristine uniform was wrinkled, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. The Mantodine ambassador is threatening to file a formal complaint with the Galactic Council if we can't solve this problem soon. Marcus nodded sympathetically. The arrival of the Mantodine diplomatic envoy had been heralded as a major breakthrough in human-Mantodian relations. The insectoid species had been notoriously reclusive, but recent threats from the Vorix Collective had pushed them to seek allies. Nobody had expected the ambassador to arrive with 6 newly hatched cubs in tow, or for those cubs to start wailing incessantly the moment their carrier ship departed. "Have they tried everything?" Marcus asked, maneuvering his cart to the side so the commander could pass. "Everything," Phillips confirmed with a weary sigh. "Our xenobiologists are stumped. The cubs are physically healthy, but they won't stop crying. The Mantodines seem as clueless as we are. Apparently, their young are normally quiet and self-sufficient from birth. This behavior is unprecedented." Marcus frowned. "Has anyone actually asked the cubs what they need?" Commander Phillips stared at him as if he'd suggested they open the airlocks for fresh air. "They're pre-verbal larvae, Dean. They can't communicate complex needs. Neither can human babies," Marcus shrugged. "But they still cry for a reason." The commander's communicator beeped, and she hurried away without responding, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the persistent wailing that seemed to be growing more frantic by the minute. As he continued his rounds, Marcus couldn't help but think about his sister's 3 children, all of whom he'd helped care for during various periods of family crisis. The youngest, his niece Lily, had been particularly colicky. He remembered countless nights walking the floors with her, trying every trick in the book to get her to sleep. When Marcus reached the recreation deck, he found it deserted except for Dr. Voss, the station's lead xenobiologist, who was slumped over a table surrounded by data pads displaying Mantodine physiology diagrams. "Any progress?" Marcus asked, emptying the waste receptacle nearest to the scientist. Dr. Voss looked up with bloodshot eyes. "None. We've tried adjusting temperature, humidity, atmospheric composition, light levels, even playing recordings of Mantodine adult vocalizations. Nothing works. The ambassador is beside himself. Apparently this is embarrassing for him, as Mantodine young are supposed to be model citizens from the moment they hatch." "Maybe that's the problem," Marcus said thoughtfully. "They're expected to be perfect right away." Dr. Voss made a dismissive noise. "They're insects, Dean. Their brains are hardwired differently than mammals. They don't have the same emotional needs." Marcus wasn't convinced. "Everything that lives needs something. Document. Maybe we're overthinking it." He finished his cleaning duties on the recreation deck and moved on, but the sound of the crying cubs followed him everywhere. By the time he reached the diplomatic wing, where the Mantodine delegation was housed, the crying had become almost unbearable. 2 security officers stood outside the nursery, looking miserable, both wearing ear protection that was clearly insufficient against the cubs' wails. Inside, Marcus could see several Mantodine attendants moving about frantically, their compound eyes reflecting the soft blue light of the incubation chambers. On impulse, Marcus approached the security checkpoint. "Mind if I take a look?" Officer Walsh, a woman Marcus knew from their shared love of vintage Earth films, shook her head. Restricted area, Marcus. Diplomatic personnel only. I need to clean in there, Marcus lied. Commander's orders. The ambassador complained about dust affecting the cubs. Walsh looked skeptical, but her partner, a newer officer whose name Marcus couldn't recall, nodded eagerly. If it might help them stop crying, I'm willing to risk it. I'm about to put my sidearm to my own head if I have to listen to this for another hour. Walsh reluctantly stepped aside, and Marcus wheeled his cart into the nursery. The Mantodine attendants immediately noticed his presence, their antennae twitching in what Marcus had learned was a sign of agitation. One of them approached, its mandibles clicking rapidly. Human maintenance worker. This area is restricted to essential diplomatic personnel, the Mantodine said in the precise, mechanical English that was characteristic of their species. I'm essential to cleanliness, Marcus replied with a friendly smile. Commander Phillips sent me to ensure the environment is free of potential irritants. The Mantodine's compound eyes gleamed as it considered this. Your assistance is welcome if it may resolve the distress of our young. Their behavior is unprecedented and brings great shame to our delegation. Marcus nodded and moved closer to the incubation chambers, pushing his cart ahead of him. The crying was deafening now, a sound that vibrated in his chest and made his teeth ache. The 6 Mantodine cubs were each about the size of a human infant. Though their proportions were different, they had elongated thoraxes, undeveloped wing casings, and tiny mandibles that opened and closed with each piercing cry. Have you held them? Marcus asked, studying the chambers. The Mantodine attendant's antennae flattened against its head. The young are kept in environmentally controlled chambers until they have developed sufficiently to regulate their own body functions. So that's a no, Marcus translated. He looked at the control panel of the nearest chamber. Can these be opened safely? It would not be advisable, the attendant replied, though Marcus noticed a hesitation in its voice. Though the atmospheric conditions of this station are within tolerance levels for brief exposure. Marcus made a decision. I'd like to try something, if you'll permit it. I have experience with human young. The Mantodine's mandibles clicked rapidly, which Marcus interpreted as uncertainty. Our young are not comparable to human offspring. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. But they're still babies, and right now they're unhappy babies. Let me try. What's the worst that could happen? They could bite you with their emerging venom sacs and cause partial paralysis, the attendant said matter-of-factly. Marcus hadn't expected that answer. Do they have venom yet? No, the Mantodine admitted. That develops in the 3rd molting cycle. They are currently in their 1st. Then I'll take my chances, Marcus said, rolling up his sleeves. After a moment of what appeared to be internal deliberation, the Mantodine reached forward with one of its upper limbs and tapped a sequence into the control panel of the nearest chamber. The transparent cover slid open with a soft hiss, and the crying from that particular cub seemed to intensify. Moving carefully but confidently, Marcus reached into the chamber and gently lifted the Mantodine cub. It was lighter than he expected, its exoskeleton warm to the touch and slightly flexible. The cub's 6 tiny limbs waved frantically as Marcus cradled it against his chest, supporting its elongated head with one hand. The cub's crying didn't stop immediately, but Marcus wasn't deterred. With practiced movements, he began to rock gently from side to side, the same motion that had soothed his niece Lily during her most difficult nights. Hey there, little one, he murmured, his voice low and soothing. It's all right. You're safe. The Mantodine attendants had gathered around, their postures suggesting either fascination or horror. Marcus wasn't sure which. The cub in his arms continued to cry, though perhaps with slightly less intensity. Marcus began to hum softly, an old lullaby his mother had sung to him. The vibrations from his chest seemed to intrigue the cub, whose crying began to falter. Encouraged, Marcus continued rocking and humming, establishing a gentle rhythm. To his amazement, the cub's cries gradually diminished, replaced by a soft chirping sound. Its limbs, which had been flailing wildly, now curled against its body in a more relaxed posture. I think it's working, Marcus whispered to the astonished Mantodine attendants. Can you open another chamber? The attendants exchanged what might have been significant looks before one of them complied, opening a second chamber. Marcus carefully transferred the now-quiet cub to one of the attendants and reached for the second, repeating the same gentle rocking motion and soft humming. The results were similar, initial resistance followed by gradual calming. By the time Marcus had soothed the third cub, the others were crying with less intensity, as if sensing the change in their siblings. They need physical contact, Marcus explained as he demonstrated the rocking technique to one of the attendants, who awkwardly attempted to mimic his motions. And a rhythm that mimics movement. If I had to guess, I'd say they're used to feeling their mother's movements before hatching. Mantodine egg clusters are constantly tended and moved by caretakers, one of the attendants confirmed. However, once hatched, the young are traditionally placed in sterile environments to minimize contamination during their vulnerable first molting cycle. Well, these little ones seem to be missing that movement, Marcus said. It might be a developmental need you didn't know about, because it's usually satisfied by your normal caretaking practices. The attendant holding the first cub looked down at the now peaceful larva in its arms. Your wisdom is unexpected, human maintenance worker. Our delegation has consulted with the finest scientific minds in the Galactic Union, yet none suggested this approach. Marcus shrugged modestly. Sometimes the simplest answer is hard to see when you're looking for something complicated. By the time Commander Phillips arrived an hour later, summoned by reports of an unauthorized human in the Mantodine nursery, the scene had transformed completely. The 6 Mantodine cubs were quiet, 3 held by their attendants who had mastered the human rocking technique, and 3 back in their chambers which had been reprogrammed to provide a gentle, rhythmic motion. Dean, what the hell is going on here? Phillips demanded, her tone a mixture of confusion and relief at the blessed silence. Marcus looked up from where he was showing an attendant how to support a cub's head properly. Just solving a little crying problem, Commander. Turns out Mantodine babies aren't so different from human ones after all. They just needed to be rocked. Phillips stared at him, then at the peaceful nursery, then back at him. You're telling me that after all our scientific consultations, diplomatic negotiations, and xenobiological research, the solution was to rock them like human babies? Yes, ma'am, Marcus nodded. Sometimes the universe is simpler than we think. The Mantodine ambassador arrived shortly afterward, his larger size and ornate exoskeletal decorations marking his status. He surveyed the quiet nursery with what Marcus interpreted as astonishment. Human Janitor, the ambassador's translator device rendered his clicks and whistles. My attendants inform me that you have resolved the crisis that has plagued our young. How did you accomplish this feat when our most advanced caretakers could not? Marcus explained his theory about the cubs needing movement and contact, demonstrating the rocking technique once more. The ambassador's antennae quivered. This simple motion has pacified them completely. Remarkable. Babies are babies, I guess, Marcus said with a smile. Doesn't matter what planet they're from. Perhaps there is more similarity between our species than we previously believed, the ambassador said thoughtfully. This discovery may have implications beyond the comfort of these 6 young ones. Commander Phillips, seeing an opportunity, stepped forward. Ambassador, this seems like an excellent foundation for our continuing diplomatic discussions. The shared experience of caring for young might be a universal constant we can build upon. The ambassador's compound eyes gleamed. Indeed, when our carrier vessel departed, I feared our mission might end in failure due to the distress of our young. Now, I believe it may succeed beyond our expectations, thanks to the wisdom of your... He paused, mandibles clicking as he searched for the word, janitor. Phillips smiled tightly. Mr. Dean has certainly demonstrated the human capacity for creative problem-solving. And compassion, the ambassador added. A quality we had not fully appreciated in your species until now. As the diplomatic talk continued around him, Marcus gently extracted himself from the conversation and returned to his cleaning cart. His shift was nearly over, and he still had the hydroponics bay to finish before morning. Officer Walsh winked at him as he exited the nursery. "Not bad for a janitor," she whispered. Marcus grinned. Sometimes the person with the mop sees things the people with the medals miss. As he pushed his cart down the corridor, leaving the now peaceful nursery behind, Marcus reflected that tonight's events would probably be recorded in some official report as a minor diplomatic breakthrough. His name might be mentioned in passing, or it might not be mentioned at all. That didn't matter to Marcus. What mattered was the memory of those alien cubs, so strange and yet so familiar, finding comfort in the same simple human gesture that had soothed countless Earth babies throughout history. In that moment of connection, the vast gulfs of biology, evolution, and interstellar space had seemed to shrink, revealing a thread of commonality that stretched across the stars. The next evening, when Marcus arrived for his shift, he found a small mantodine artifact waiting on his cleaning cart, a beautiful crystalline structure that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. Attached was a note in precise, mechanical handwriting. For the human who taught us that wisdom can be found in the simplest of gestures. With gratitude, the mantodine diplomatic envoy. Marcus smiled and carefully pocketed the gift before beginning his rounds. The corridors of the station were peaceful tonight, no crying to be heard. As he pushed his cart toward the first cleaning zone, he began to hum softly to himself, the same lullaby that had bridged the gap between worlds. In the days that followed, the success of the mantodine diplomatic mission became the talk of the station. Trade agreements were being discussed, cultural exchanges planned. And in the nursery, mantodine attendants could be seen rocking their cubs in a distinctly human fashion, some even humming tunes they had learned from the station's crew. Commander Phillips found Marcus in the maintenance bay one afternoon, repairing a cleaning drone. "The Admiral sends his congratulations," she said without preamble. "Your intervention with the mantodine cubs has accelerated diplomatic relations significantly. The ambassador specifically requested that you be present at the signing ceremony next week." Marcus looked up from his work, surprised. "Me? I just helped some babies sleep." "You did more than that," Phillips said, her usual stern expression softening slightly. "You found common ground where our best diplomats saw only differences. That's a rare gift, Dean." "Just seemed like the right thing to do," Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Well, the right thing has opened doors we've been trying to unlock for years," Phillips continued. "The mantodines are traditionally isolationist, but the ambassador has been remarkably forthcoming since that night. He's even agreed to discuss joint defense strategies against the Vorix Collective." Marcus nodded, understanding the significance. The Vorix had been expanding aggressively at the expense of less militaristic species like the mantodines. Human military strategists had long sought allies in that region of space, but had made little headway until now. "Happy to help," he said simply. "Though I should warn you, if they make me wear a dress uniform for this ceremony, I can't promise I won't spill something on it." Phillips actually laughed, a sound so rare that Marcus blinked in surprise. "Just be yourself, Dean. That seems to work better than all our protocols anyway." As she walked away, Marcus returned to his repair work, his thoughts drifting to the mantodine cubs. By now, they'd probably be approaching their second molting cycle, growing and changing rapidly. He wondered if they would remember the human who had rocked them to sleep, or if that memory would fade as they matured into the logical, methodical adults of their species. Either way, something had changed that night, not just for the cubs, but for human-mantodian relations, for the station, and perhaps even for Marcus himself. Sometimes the smallest actions, performed with kindness rather than calculation, could echo across the stars in ways no one could predict. The universe, in all its vast complexity, still responded to the simple rhythm of a lullaby and the gentle rocking of a cradle. And in that simplicity, Marcus had found a profound truth, that beneath our different exteriors, from human skin to alien exoskeletons, we shared more than we knew. That night, as Marcus made his rounds through the quiet corridors of the station, he passed the mantodine nursery and paused, peering through the observation window. Inside, the cubs were sleeping peacefully, their tiny forms illuminated by the soft blue light of their chambers. But the chambers were different now. They moved in a gentle, rocking rhythm, mimicking the motion that had finally brought them comfort. Marcus smiled and continued on his way, humming softly to himself. Some problems in the universe could be solved with advanced technology, diplomatic protocols, and scientific analysis. But others, perhaps the most important ones, required nothing more than a kind heart and the wisdom to see that across the vast expanse of space, we were all, in some fundamental way, the same. The signing ceremony was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his 15 years of working maintenance jobs across Earth and space. The station's main conference hall had been transformed with both human and mantodine decorative elements. Crystalline structures that reminded Marcus of his gift stood alongside traditional human floral arrangements, creating an atmosphere of deliberate cultural fusion. Marcus fidgeted in his dress uniform, borrowed from Officer Walsh's brother and hastily tailored to fit his broader shoulders. Commander Phillips had insisted he attend as an honored guest rather than staff, a distinction that made Marcus profoundly uncomfortable. He was a janitor, not a diplomat, and the stiff collar of the formal uniform reminded him of this fact with every turn of his head. "Stop pulling at your collar," Walsh whispered, appearing beside him in her security officer's formal uniform. "You look fine." "I look like someone playing dress-up," Marcus grumbled. "This isn't me." Walsh rolled her eyes. "For today it is. You're a cultural ambassador now, whether you like it or not. The Mantodines specifically requested your presence." Before Marcus could protest further, the ceremony began. Human and Mantodine officials filed in, taking their positions on opposite sides of a central table where the agreement would be signed. Admiral Takahashi, who had arrived from Earth specifically for this event, represented the human delegation, while the Mantodine ambassador led his people. What surprised Marcus most was the presence of the 6 Mantodine cubs, carried by their attendants in special harnesses that provided the constant rocking motion they now knew was essential for their comfort. The cubs had grown noticeably in the 2 weeks since Marcus had first held them, their exoskeletons beginning to harden and take on the iridescent quality characteristic of adult Mantodines. The formal proceedings began with speeches from both sides, full of diplomatic language about cooperation and mutual respect. Marcus's attention drifted until he heard his name mentioned by the Mantodine ambassador. And we must acknowledge the contribution of human Marcus Dean. The ambassador's translator rendered his clicks and whistles, whose insight into the needs of our young has created a foundation of trust between our peoples that no amount of formal negotiation could have achieved. All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. The ambassador continued. In Mantodine culture, one who cares for the young is held in the highest esteem, for they shape the future of our kind. Human Marcus Dean has demonstrated that humans share this value, though they express it differently. This shared value forms the true basis of our alliance. Admiral Takahashi nodded in agreement, adding, "Sometimes the greatest diplomacy happens not in conference rooms, but in nurseries and kitchens and ordinary places where people meet as equals." Mr. Dean's simple act of compassion has taught us all a valuable lesson about interspecies relations. Marcus wanted to sink through the floor. He hadn't done anything special, just applied what he knew about human babies to alien ones. Anyone with his experience would have done the same. But as he looked around the room, he realized that wasn't true. The scientists and diplomats, for all their training and intelligence, hadn't seen the simple solution that was obvious to him. After the speeches, the actual signing took place. A complex process involving both electronic verification and the traditional Mantodine practice of secreting a specially formulated resin onto the physical document. Marcus watched with interest, noting how carefully the human protocols had been modified to accommodate Mantodine customs, and vice versa. When the formal ceremony concluded, Admiral Takahashi approached Marcus, hand extended. "Mr. Dean, I want to personally thank you for your contribution to this historic alliance." Marcus shook the Admiral's hand, acutely aware of the disparity in their ranks. I just helped some babies sleep, sir. The diplomats did the real work. Don't underestimate what you did, Takahashi said seriously. The Mantodines were ready to terminate negotiations and leave the station when their young couldn't be consoled. Your intervention quite literally saved this alliance before it began. Before Marcus could respond, one of the Mantodine attendants approached, a cub secured in the harness across its thorax. Human Marcus Dean, the attendant clicked. This one has been asking for you. Marcus blinked in surprise. Asking for me? I thought they were pre-verbal. They communicate through pheromones and subtle movements, the attendant explained. This one produces distinct biochemical markers when you are near or mentioned. Our scientists believe it recognizes you as its first caretaker. The Admiral smiled. I'll leave you to your admirer, Mr. Dean. But we'll speak again before I depart the station. Left alone with the Mantodine attendant, Marcus peered at the cub in the harness. Its compound eyes seemed to track his movements, and its tiny mandibles clicked in what Marcus could have sworn was excitement. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the cub. The attendant carefully removed the cub from the harness and placed it in Marcus's waiting hands. The cub immediately settled against his chest, its limbs relaxing in apparent contentment. Well, hello again, little one, Marcus said softly. You've grown since I last held you. They grow quickly in the early molting cycles, the attendant confirmed. This one will reach adolescent stage within 3 of your Earth months. Marcus marveled at the rapid development. That's remarkable. Human babies take years to develop comparable abilities. Each species has its evolutionary advantages, the attendant replied. We mature quickly, but have shorter lifespans than humans. Our young may develop faster, but yours have more time to learn and adapt. As they spoke, other attendants brought the remaining cubs to meet Marcus. Each seemed to recognize him, responding to his voice and touch with what he could only interpret as happiness. It was a strange feeling, being remembered and apparently cherished by creatures so alien, yet somehow familiar. The interaction was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the entrance to the conference hall. Security officers rushed forward as a group of humans in civilian clothing pushed their way into the room, their expressions hostile. Earth for humans, one of them shouted. No alien alliances. Marcus recognized the slogan of the Earth First Movement, a fringe group that opposed all extraterrestrial cooperation. How they had gained access to the station during such a high-security event was concerning, but there was no time to wonder about that now. Instinctively, Marcus turned to shield the Mantodine cubs with his body as security officers moved to intercept the protesters. The Mantodine attendants clicked in alarm, gathering close to protect their charges. The protests seemed to be poorly organized, more of a symbolic disruption than a serious threat, but the damage to the ceremonial atmosphere was done. Admiral Takahashi looked furious as security removed the protesters, and the Mantodine officials had drawn together in a defensive formation, their postures rigid with what Marcus recognized as anxiety. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus realized the cub he was holding had begun to emit a high-pitched keening sound, the same distress call that had kept the station awake those nights ago. The other cubs quickly joined in, their cries building to a painful crescendo. They sensed the danger, one of the attendants explained, mandibles clicking rapidly. They are calling for protection. Without thinking, Marcus began to rock gently, humming the lullaby that had soothed them before. It's all right, he murmured to the cub in his arms. You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you. Gradually, the cub he held quieted, its distress call fading to a soft chirp. The attendants, seeing his success, quickly mimicked his actions with the other cubs, rocking and making soothing sounds until the crisis of crying passed. The Mantodine ambassador approached, his compound eyes fixed on Marcus and the now calm cub. Once again, you demonstrate the wisdom we failed to see, he said through his translator. Our young sense hostility, yet you provide security through your presence alone. Marcus shrugged awkwardly, still holding the cub. It's just instinct, I guess. Protect the little ones. A good instinct, the ambassador replied. One that transcends our biological differences. Admiral Takahashi joined them, his expression grave. Ambassador, I must apologize for this disruption. The protesters will be detained and questioned. This incident represents a tiny minority view, not the position of Earth's government or its people. The ambassador's antennae waved in what Marcus had learned was a gesture of acknowledgement. We understand the concept of dissenting factions, Admiral. Such elements exist within our own society as well. Nevertheless, Takahashi insisted, security protocols clearly failed today. There will be a full investigation. As the officials discussed the security breach, Marcus continued to hold the Mantodine cub, who had now fallen asleep against his chest. There was something profoundly moving about the trust this alien creature placed in him, a reminder that beneath the diplomatic language and political considerations, there were simply living beings seeking safety and comfort. The incident, though quickly contained, cast a shadow over what should have been a purely celebratory day. The remaining formalities were completed with heightened security, and the gathered officials dispersed more quickly than planned. As Marcus prepared to return the sleeping cub to its attendant, Commander Phillips approached. Dean, the Admiral would like to see you in his temporary office. Now, if possible. Marcus carefully transferred the sleeping cub, feeling a pang of something like parental reluctance as he did so. Is this about the protesters? I didn't see anything useful. Just go, Phillips said, her expression unreadable. And stop looking like you're headed to your execution. Despite appearances, the Admiral doesn't bite. Admiral Takahashi's temporary office was a repurposed conference room with minimal decorations and a view of the station's docking bay. The Admiral himself sat behind a standard-issue desk, reviewing something on a datapad. Mr. Dean, he said, looking up as Marcus entered. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Marcus perched uncomfortably on the offered chair, acutely aware that his borrowed uniform was wrinkled from holding the Mantodine cub. Sir, if this is about the security breach, I didn't see anything that would help identify. Takahashi held up a hand. This isn't about the protesters, though that matter is being handled separately. I wanted to discuss your future, Mr. Dean. My future, sir? Marcus repeated, confused. Yes, the Admiral nodded. Your actions with the Mantodine young have demonstrated an exceptional aptitude for interspecies relations, a natural instinct that can't be taught in any academy or diplomatic course. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I just did what seemed right, sir. Precisely, Takahashi said with a small smile. And that instinct is invaluable. The Galactic Union is expanding rapidly, bringing humanity into contact with more species than ever before. We need people who can bridge the gaps between different biologies, psychologies, and cultures. People who see the commonalities rather than just the differences. A suspicion began to form in Marcus's mind. Sir, if you're suggesting I become some kind of diplomat, I should tell you I don't have the education or background for that kind of work. I'm suggesting nothing of the sort, Takahashi replied. Formal diplomats are important, but so are people who work in the spaces between official channels. I'm offering you a position as a cultural integration specialist with the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Marcus blinked. I've never heard of that position. Because we're creating it, Takahashi said simply. The incident with the Mantodine cubs has highlighted a gap in our approach to interspecies relations. We focus so much on formal diplomatic protocols that we sometimes miss the simple, human connections that can make all the difference. I don't understand what this job would actually involve, Marcus said cautiously. The Admiral leaned forward. You would work alongside traditional diplomatic teams, but your focus would be on the everyday aspects of cultural exchange, helping visiting alien delegations understand human customs and vice versa, identifying potential areas of miscommunication before they become diplomatic incidents, finding those small points of connection that can build trust. Like helping alien babies sleep? Marcus asked with a small smile. Exactly like that, Takahashi nodded. The job would involve extensive travel to different stations and outposts, and you'd receive specialized training, of course. But the core qualification is something you already possess, the ability to see past exteriors to the needs and feelings beneath. Marcus was silent for a long moment, considering. For 15 years, he had cleaned floors and fixed equipment, doing work that was necessary but rarely noticed or appreciated. The idea of a job where his particular insights would be valued was appealing, but also intimidating. "What if I make a mistake?" he asked finally. "Diplomatic relations are complicated. I could say or do the wrong thing and cause problems." "Everyone makes mistakes," Takahashi said. "Even career diplomats. The difference is that you have something many of them lack: genuine empathy and an open mind. Those qualities can bridge gaps that no amount of protocol training can cross." Marcus thought about the Mantodine cubs, about how a simple act of human kindness had created a connection that extensive diplomatic negotiations had failed to establish. Perhaps there was something to what the Admiral was suggesting. "I'd need time to think about it," he said finally. "Of course," Takahashi nodded. "Take a few days. The position would start after a 3-month training period on Earth, should you accept." As Marcus left the Admiral's office, his mind whirled with possibilities. The prospect of leaving his familiar routine was daunting, but the idea of finding more moments of connection like he had with the Mantodine cubs was deeply appealing. He made his way to the observation deck, needing a quiet place to think. The vast expanse of space stretched before him, stars scattered like dust across the darkness. Somewhere out there were countless species, each with their own biologies and cultures, their own needs and fears and hopes. "Quite a view, isn't it?" said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to find Dr. Voss, the xenobiologist, gazing out at the stars. "Always makes me feel small," Marcus admitted. "It should," Voss nodded. "But also connected. Those same physical laws that govern those distant stars also govern us. The same elements that form those celestial bodies form our own." Marcus smiled. "Sounds like you've been thinking along the same lines I have, about connections and commonalities. Your success with the Mantodine cubs forced me to reconsider some of my assumptions," Voss admitted. "I've been too focused on the differences between species, when perhaps I should have been looking more carefully at the similarities." "The Admiral offered me a job," Marcus said suddenly. "As a cultural integration specialist, whatever that means." Voss raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant change from maintenance work." "I'm not sure I'm qualified," Marcus confessed. "I'm just a janitor who happened to have experience with crying babies." "Perhaps that's precisely the qualification needed," Voss said thoughtfully. "Science and diplomacy give us frameworks for understanding, but sometimes what's needed is simply human intuition and compassion." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as a transport ship departed the station, its engines flaring briefly before it disappeared into the darkness. "The universe is vast," Voss said finally, "but living things, wherever they evolve, face similar challenges: the need for safety, for nourishment, for belonging. Perhaps the differences between us, striking as they may be, are ultimately less significant than what we share." Marcus nodded, thinking of the Mantodine cub that had recognized him, that had found comfort in his arms despite the vast evolutionary gulf between their species. Maybe that's what this new job would really be about, finding those universal needs we all share. 3 days later, Marcus stood in the same observation deck, having made his decision. The Admiral had been pleased with his acceptance, and arrangements were already being made for his departure to Earth for training. As he prepared to leave the station that had been his home for the past 4 years, Marcus made one final visit to the Mantodine nursery. The cubs were noticeably larger now, their exoskeletons beginning to take on the distinctive patterns that would identify them as adults. "Human Marcus Dean," one of the attendants greeted him. "We have been informed of your new position. It is well-deserved recognition of your skills." "Thank you," Marcus said, watching as the cubs moved about their enclosure with increasing coordination. "I wanted to say goodbye before I left." The attendant's antennae twitched. "The young ones will not understand the concept of farewell, but they will remember your biochemical signature and voice patterns. In the Mantodine understanding, this means you are forever part of their developmental history." Marcus smiled at the thought. "I like that idea. That even across space and time, we remain connected to those who helped us grow." It is a universal principle, the attendant agreed. All living things carry the influence of their caretakers, whether they are of the same species or not. As Marcus prepared to leave, the smallest of the cubs, the one he had first held that night, when their crying seemed unstoppable, approached the transparent barrier of the enclosure. It placed one tiny limb against the surface, compound eyes fixed on Marcus's face. Without hesitation, Marcus placed his palm against the barrier, matching the cub's gesture. There was no way to know if the cub understood the meaning of the action, but in that moment of connection, it didn't matter. Some forms of communication transcended language, biology, and even the vast gulfs of space that separated worlds. "Goodbye, little one," Marcus said softly. "Grow well." As he turned to leave, Marcus caught sight of himself reflected in a polished surface, still recognizably the station janitor, but somehow changed. In helping the Mantodine cubs, he had discovered something important about himself and about humanity's place in the wider galaxy. The universe, for all its complexity and diversity, responded to simple kindness. Across the vastness of space, across the boundaries of biology and evolution, living beings shared certain fundamental needs for safety, for comfort, for connection. And in recognizing and honoring those needs, humans might find their true value among the stars. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a different station. This one orbiting a distant world where humans were establishing their first diplomatic relations with the Tellurian Collective, a federation of silicon-based life forms with communication methods so alien that traditional linguistic approaches had failed entirely. "The negotiations are at a standstill," Commander Reyes, the station's diplomatic officer, explained. "We've tried everything: mathematical sequences, chemical exchanges, even music and art. Nothing seems to create meaningful communication." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, watching through the viewport as the crystalline Tellurian ship maintained its position near the station. Unlike the insectoid Mantodines, the Tellurians were utterly alien. Their silicon-based biology resulting in forms that resembled geometric structures more than living creatures. "What do we know about their social structure?" Marcus asked. "Very little," Reyes admitted. "Our xenobiologists believe they function as a collective consciousness, but with individual units that can act independently when needed. Beyond that, we're in the dark." Marcus considered this. Every species, no matter how different, has evolved to survive in its environment. That means they must have mechanisms for protecting themselves, for obtaining resources, for ensuring the continuation of their kind. "How does that help us communicate with them?" Reyes asked skeptically. "Because those basic needs create universal patterns," Marcus explained, thinking back to his training and his experience with the Mantodine cubs. "We just need to find which pattern resonates with them." Over the next week, Marcus observed the Tellurians carefully, noting how their crystalline forms interacted with light, how they positioned themselves relative to each other, how they responded to different environmental stimuli. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one based not on language or mathematics, but on spatial relationships and light frequencies. Working with the station's engineering team, Marcus designed a communication protocol based on these observations, a system of position light sources that mimicked the patterns he had seen in the Tellurian formations. When the system was activated, the response was immediate. The Tellurian ship changed configuration, its crystalline surfaces rearranging to reflect the light patterns back to the station, but with subtle variations that suggested a response rather than mere mimicry. "I think they're talking to us," Marcus said excitedly. "Not with words, but with relationships, spatial positioning, light frequencies, geometric arrangements." Commander Reyes looked skeptical but hopeful. "What are they saying?" Marcus studied the patterns carefully. I think they're asking who we are. Not our names or titles, but what kind of beings, how we relate to our environment, to each other, to the universe itself." "How do we answer that?" Reyes asked. Marcus smiled, remembering the Mantodine cubs and the universal need for connection. "We show them." Under Marcus's direction, The station's external lights were reconfigured to project images of human life, not just diplomatic meetings or technological achievements, but ordinary moments, people sharing meals, parents holding children, friends laughing together, hands reaching out to help others. The Tellurian ship remained motionless for several long minutes after the display. Then, slowly, it began to reconfigure, its crystalline surfaces forming patterns that mimicked the human images, but with Tellurian variations, structures supporting other structures, formations that suggested nurturing, protection, cooperation. They understand, Marcus whispered, not our words, but our nature, what makes us human. In that moment, as the human station and alien ship exchanged images of their most fundamental relationships, Marcus thought back to the night when the Mantodine cubs had cried until a simple human gesture had soothed them. Across the vast diversity of life in the universe, certain principles remained constant: the need for security, for nurturing, for connection. Humanity's place among the stars would not be determined by superior technology or military might, but by the capacity to recognize these universal needs and respond to them with compassion and wisdom. In the cosmic community of intelligent species, perhaps humans would serve not as conquerors or even leaders, but as connectors, beings whose evolutionary path had given them a unique ability to bridge differences and find common ground. As Marcus watched the continuing exchange of light patterns between the station and the Tellurian ship, the beginning of what would become a profound interspecies friendship, he thought that this role suited humanity perfectly. In a universe of endless diversity, the greatest strength might be the ability to see past differences to the common needs and hopes that united all living things. The alien cubs had cried all night, until the human janitor rocked them to sleep. And in that simple act of connection, a greater truth had been revealed: that beneath our different exteriors, we were all, in some essential way, the same. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.